a world of laughter, a world of tears. It's a world of hopes, and a world of fears.
Although I've had several paranormal experiences in my life, I was always a skeptic. I tried to debunk my own experiences. What if I was just tired? There must be a logical explanation. However, this experience made me a believer. A few years ago, I visited my friend who lives abroad. We decided to go inside an old amusement park that had been abandoned years ago. As a kid, my friend visited the place every week, so it was pure nostalgia for her. We snuck through a hole in the fence and entered the park. The place was taken back by nature, mostly overgrown and with small swampy puddles everywhere. We were nervous about snakes hiding in the grass and about the big pack of feral dogs roaming the property, but the paranormal hadn't crossed our minds. Upon entering the park, the dogs bark at us, warning us to leave them alone, so we avoid the area where they are and go explore. We seemed to be the only people there. After a good 30 minutes of exploring, we stumble upon an empty karaoke bar. The place feels off somehow, not like the other buildings we encountered. My friend explains that this building is not what it seems. Karaoke bars in her country are often a cover for alcohol consumption, which was illegal back then, and prostitution. She doesn't recognize the place though, which is weird since she spent a big part of her childhood at that park. We figured that it must have been a bit hidden away from the crowds since it was likely linked to illegal activity. The moment we enter the building, my attention was immediately drawn towards a creepy door with a broken glass panel. You could see there was nothing on the other side, but somehow the darkness behind the door seemed more solid. I stared at it for at least a good 15 seconds before I told myself to stop freaking out about a door. While we explore the first floor, I hear footsteps right behind me. Thinking it was my friend, I turn around, ready to make a stupid joke about her creeping up on me. But she isn't there. I see her at the other end of the room, at least 8 meters away from me. I chalk it up to weird acoustics and don't tell her about it. Do you know that feeling you get when people are staring at you? That's how the second floor felt. It was as if we walked into a crowded room, except there was nobody there. Like on the first floor, the darkness of some unlit areas somehow seemed too dark, more solid. I became increasingly nervous, but I didn't tell my friend since I don't want to sound crazy. Soon, my friend stopped in her tracks and said that she wasn't comfortable exploring any further. She later described that room as a black hole. She recalls feeling as if all her movements were slower than normal and her brain was foggy. This was right above the door that freaked me out so much. Back on the first floor, we feel silly for being nervous and try to overcome our fears. I decide to open a door adjacent to the freaky door, which was easier said than done. The door was stuck, and I had to put my weight behind it to get it to open. We saw a glimpse of the small storage room before the door was slammed shut again. We almost made a run for it, but since we stubbornly didn't want to give in to our fears and be pussies, we took a few more pictures of the room before we left. Once outside, we rationalized it by saying it must have just been some sort of animal, a stray dog maybe, but we're not convinced. Opening the door took some strength, so what animal could have closed it with such force? There was barely any space between the open door and the wall, so I doubt that it could have been a person hiding there. We talk for a bit to lighten the mood, and we feel braver now that we're outside again. We decide to visit her favorite attraction next, a pirate ship. In the past, it would swing back and forth, but now, we couldn't get to move no matter how much we tried. We both pushed against it with our full body weight, but the ship wouldn't budge. We take a few photos while we chat about my friend's memories of the park. All of a sudden, the pirate ship begins to move. Slow at first, so slow that I thought I imagined it. But then, it starts to swing more clearly. Since we don't feel the creepy vibes that we felt at the karaoke bar, we decided to stay and watch. After a few minutes, my friend remarks that we should head back soon, since she wouldn't want to be in this place after dark. Immediately after these words left her mouth, it gets darker, as if it was suddenly twilight. Remember the dogs who barked when we entered the park? They had been quiet since they realized we were not a threat. But now, they go wild, barking, howling in the distance. My friend and I don't hesitate to make a run for it. We run through the dark, overgrown park while the dogs go crazy. It was surreal. Once we reach the hole in the fence, we crawl out as fast as we can, and suddenly we feel safe again. I swear to God, once outside, the sun was shining bright again. We looked up to see if it was just a well-timed cloud that moved in front of the sun, but we couldn't see anything. To this day, my friend is convinced that something told us to leave, since it got dark, right after we decided to go home once it was getting dark. I don't believe in these kind of theories, but feeling-wise, it genuinely felt as if we went through some sort of gateway when we entered the park, as if it was its own little world. The contrast was that big. Back home, we talked about our experiences. Apparently, we both felt uneasy in the karaoke bar long before we actually voiced these feelings. I told her about the creepy vibe I got from the door and showed her a picture that I took of it when we first entered the building. She tells me she felt the same thing and took a picture just before we left. Upon comparison, we realized that the door is cracked open a little bit in my photo, but in hers, it's half open. These photos were taken 5 minutes apart, and it seems very unlikely that someone snuck in to open it while we were on the second floor. The dog pack was in a different area of the park, and there was no wind that day. I don't have an explanation, but given our experiences at the park, this creeped me out even more. Like I said, I have experienced strange things before, but nothing like this. In the hour that we spent at the park, I went from a skeptic to a believer. I would love to go back someday and see what happens. This happened when I was in the early years of high school, right in the middle of summer. All my homework and chores were done, and I had the rest of the holidays ahead of me. One day I was doing nothing much at home, and my friend called to say he was free as well. He invited me to a nearby theme park. I said that it sounded like a great idea, and I'd be there. I was really excited. My friend said he would be over shortly, so I got changed and there was a knock at the door. The weather was gorgeous. I got in his mum's car and off we went. We arrived at the theme park. My friend wanted to get on the roller coaster right away. I was like, "So soon? Don't you want to build up to it?" He couldn't be swayed. The roller coaster was a little more intense than I had hoped for. It shook me up a bit. Before you laugh, I was only young. He wanted to go on another G-Force Mega Thrill ride, and I wanted to take it a little easier, so I suggested we try another ride. The Ferris wheel looked pretty free. It took only 5 minutes to line up for it. The guy who was running the ride was nice, and made sure we were all set up and ready to ride. We boarded our carriage and began our ascent. There was a nice breeze. I could see the sea and birds flying in the distance. It was really great. Sometimes, with all the new rides, you forget how good the classics are. It was a really nice change of pace. The gondola in front of us and the one behind us were empty. Of course, my pal was shaking the gondola to try and make it feel more like a roller coaster. I told him to quit it, and he did. We were approaching the top of the wheel. We got this sweet, panoramic view of the park and the beach. My friend gasped suddenly. He stopped all his fidgeting and jigging around. "No way," he muttered. I followed his eyeline, and he was staring at the gondola behind us. The one behind us was empty, I was sure of it. But now, There was a girl about our age, riding in it. She was just staring at us. It was the strangest thing. Soon, our gondola dipped into the 3 o'clock position, and we couldn't see her any longer. We got off at the bottom, and the guy who was running the ride must have noticed our expressions. Expressions that he had no doubt seen before, because he asked us almost immediately, "I guess you saw her then?" My friend and I couldn't muster up any form of response. "She's always riding the Ferris wheel, boys," he said as he smirked. I really wish I were a couple of years older or a little more confident back then, because I would have asked him some questions. She was so pale, and we only saw her for a couple of seconds. I often think about that moment. A few years back, during my junior year of high school, I was in a tourism class at my vocational school. It was a lot of fun, honestly. Me and my buddies got to go on trips while others were stuck in class. In mid-October of 2017, we went to Pipestem in Pipestem, West Virginia. The first day was pretty standard as far as a trip can go. Me and the guys had our own cabin out in the woods, and the girls had the same accommodations. The next day, though, things got really weird. We were bored in our cabin the following night, so we decided to head to Lake Shawnee. It was an amusement park built on an Indian burial ground that operated back in the early 1900s. It was shut down in the late 60s, I believe after a child drowned in the lake. We waited till after dark and then headed over there because it was only like a 10-minute drive. We were laughing the whole way over there, just acting like dumb teenagers. As soon as we pulled near the tree line the park played just beyond, something felt off. All the joy was sucked out of me. I just felt like we weren't welcome there. The park has 2 attractions, the Ferris wheel and the swings. Basking in the full moon, the park looked hauntingly beautiful. At this point, we're still being shithead kids, and I decided it's a good idea to take a seat on one of these swings. We hang around for 20 more minutes, and just as we're leaving, I feel a burning sensation on my lower back, like someone has pressed a hot iron against it. Ignoring it wasn't helping, as it just intensified this scorching pain. I tell my buddy to pull out a flashlight and check out my back, see if I scraped on a branch or on some rust at the park. Sure enough, 3 distinct claw marks ran the length of my lower back. It made all the hairs on my body stand up. I felt like something was there, hovering over me like a dark cloud. We get back to our cabin, and the scratches are nowhere to be seen at this point. But I wasn't feeling any better. I felt like I was a passenger in my own body, like I was in third person. There was something malevolent. I could feel it. But I was tired beyond belief at this point, so I got to our room and crashed on the bed. At about 3 a.m. that night, one of my buddies calls from the living room, his voice trembling. Me and my 2 other buddies in the room go to check on him. The front door was wide open. He looked gaunt, drenched in sweat. His appearance was how I felt only a couple of hours earlier. He explained that he was fast asleep on the couch when he felt a cool breeze across his face. Sitting up and seeing the seemingly endless wilderness outside our cabin, we were all shook up pretty bad. As well as having locked the front door, all of us stayed in our rooms for almost the entire night. I didn't believe in all this ghost bullshit before this happened, but something followed me back from Lake Shawnee. Something evil, perhaps even something ancient. When I was about 11 or 12, I went to an amusement park called Kings Island with my sister, grandma, and mum. Since we knew the area well and had phones on us at the time, my mum and grandma would let my sister and I roam on our own to ride whatever we wanted. My sister and I just got done at the arcade. As we left the arcade, we made our way towards the Diamondback, which is a roller coaster. Before we got to the Diamondback, I told my sister we should go on the Zephyr, which is a swing-like carnival ride. I was on the left side, and my sister was on the right side, just to paint the picture. As we were about to get into the line, a man who looked to be about 30 or 40 walked up to me. He put his hand on my lower back/arse area and walked alongside me. As I gave him a dirty look, he immediately apologized and claimed he thought I was his girlfriend. Then he walked away, as if nothing had happened. I bawled my eyes out and immediately ran back to find my mum and grandma. I explained what happened, and we decided to leave the park at that moment. While I was young at the time, I had heard enough stories about abductions to know that it could have ended a lot worse. Considering the fact that I was 11 or 12 while my sister was 9 or 10, and he was about 30 or 40, I remember thinking there was most likely no way he thought I was his girlfriend, or that my sister was anywhere close to his age. Maybe he did think I was his girlfriend, and it was an honest mistake. Either way, it creeped me out a lot. So amusement park creep, let's not meet again. This happened when I went to a theme park in Nagasaki with 3 friends. The sun set in the blink of an eye. We were having a great time riding the various attractions, eating and enjoying the illumination lights. It had rained and it was a little damp, but overall it was great. We moved towards an attraction inside a palace. There was a huge line of people waiting to get in. Since I guessed we would be waiting for a while, I took the chance to go to the bathroom. When I came back, I couldn't find my friends anywhere, since the line of people seemed to have doubled. I called one of my friends. They answered straight away. "Sorry, where are you guys?" I heard my friend's side of the call. It sounded really noisy, like they were in a crowd of people. "Can you raise your arm so we can see you?" I asked. "Yes, come find us," she replied through the intermittent static. I hung up. I tried to find a bit of free space in the crowd to make it easier for my friends to find me. However, I didn't see any of my friends or any arms up in the air. I gave them a call back. "Hey, sorry, I can't find you yet. Have you still got your arm up?" There, in the crowd, I saw an arm raise up. I pushed through the crowd to get to them, but when I reached the place I thought they were, I couldn't find them. Someone else had their arm up. I was about to call them back when I saw someone with their arm up in the small grove of trees behind the crowd. I wondered, as I grew closer to them, why they had chosen such a strange place to wait for me. I saw my 3 friends beckoning to me in the wooded area. I started to speed up to reach them. They were receding into the tree line. Just as I was about to start jogging, I felt a hand land on my shoulder. "Where are you going?" one of my friends asked. "Where have you been?" she asked. I didn't know what was happening. They had just been waving me over to the trees, yet now they were in front of me. I turned back to the trees, and there was no one there. I told my friends about what I had just experienced. I pointed out that I had even spoken with one of them over the phone, but they just stared at me confused and showed me their call history. If I hadn't spoken with any of them, then who did I speak with? And who were the people calling me into the woods? I was so confused I couldn't enjoy the rest of our time at the theme park. I couldn't get what had just happened out of my head. Since the park was so big, we decided to take a boat ride back to the entrance. Taking in some of the illumination and scenery should have calmed me down a bit, but it didn't. Something else happened. As we were going down the canal in our boat, there was a large bridge up ahead, and there were 4 figures stood on the bridge. I can remember it so clearly. I saw all 4 of us on that bridge. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I turned to my friends to see if they were as shocked as I was, but It was as if they couldn't see them. I looked back at the bridge. This time, I couldn't turn away. I felt as if I were frozen in time. Those doppelgangers just stared back at me and grinned surreptitiously. The boat went under the bridge. I turned around to get another look at them, but when we came out the other side, they had disappeared. I have no idea if this was some sort of glitch in the Matrix or if I was looking into a parallel universe or something. I just remember how horrifying the whole experience was to me. It was uncanny, and I often see those doppelgangers when I shut my eyes. Was something calling me? I will update if anything else happens. So this takes place about 6 months ago at my job. Some background. I'm 19 years old, 18 at the time. I work at a small amusement park/arcade in a semi-rural area, which generally will have a good amount of people. This happened during our summer season, so we were open until 9 p.m. But we generally only have at most 10 families around 6:37 p.m. I mostly work outside as a ride attendant, so I get a lot of customer interaction from people all the time and usually don't think much of it. On to the story. I had come into work at around 3 p.m. and my day was going normally. At around 3:30 I was running one of the roller coasters, which has a big box for the operator to run the ride from. These two kids show up. One looked about 8 years old and the other about 15 or so. They seemed very sweet and very funny, so I was just enthusiastically telling them the rules and just being as kind as I possibly could so they could enjoy themselves. As soon as the ride would finish, they'd run from the exit right back into line to go again, which isn't unusual because I get kids that do that all the time. Sometimes I'll even have kids who do it over and over again for an hour or more. Soon enough, they stopped riding and waved me off as they ran to some other rides to have fun. At some point afterwards, one of my co-workers came up to switch positions with me and sent me off to the Tilt-A-Whirl, another ride we have. As I'm walking down, I see from a distance a man in a black shirt standing at our gem mining station. It's a smallish water tower that constantly releases water so kids can sift through the sand and get cool rocks and such. He was just holding his hand in the water, so I was going to ignore him as I made my way to the ride. As I'm getting closer, he looks me up and down and asks my name. I couldn't lie about it obviously since I had a name tag on, so I just told him. He then proceeds to say,
"Do you think I can see you later tonight?"
To which I respond no. I walked away to the ride I was operating and told a co-worker about what happened. We laughed it off as if it were nothing, and I sent him on his way to the ride he had to run. Not even 5 minutes later, the guy shows up to my ride with the two kids who I let on the roller coaster I was previously running. I'm of course not looking forward to letting him on, but I toughed it out since the kids were just trying to enjoy themselves. They walk up to the entrance of the ride and I asked the man if he could hold the fence door open as I scanned his wristband. The fence door opens inward and the scanner is on the opposite side, so I ask customers to hold it open so I don't block them as they try to get on the ride. He responded with,
"Of course, I'll do anything for you, whatever you want."
As I scanned their wristbands, the scanner showed that they had run out of credits, so I made sure to tell them. The younger kid with him looked upset, so I told them they could get on the ride this one time and they could just go talk to the front counter after. I put them on and explained the rules of the ride and ran it as usual. The entire time that the ride was running, I noticed the man was staring at me. He never let his eyes off me, so I tried my hardest to avoid his gaze. I tried not to seem alarmed because his kids were in other carts joking around and making funny faces and gesturing at me, trying to make me laugh, so I just pretended I didn't notice the man. Once the ride finished, the youngest kid stood up and said he wanted to go again. I felt bad for him and since there wasn't any people in line, I told him he could go on again. The older kid felt dizzy, so he just got off the ride while the man and the younger child stayed on. I ran it again and noticed the man was still not letting his gaze off of me. Toward the end of the ride, I saw he was lifting up his lap bar, so I told him to leave it down. It acts as a second brake to slow down individual carts. Later, once the ride came to a stop, I looked over at him to tell him about the front counter, only to notice that he had put his hand in his pants to make his crutch more noticeable. I was highly disturbed, of course, because I was literally not trying to be forced to look at some dude's excited phase. I quickly made sure they left and just avoided looking at the man the entire time. Later, once I had no more customers, I made sure to go to my supervisor at the time. I explained to her what happened, but she didn't know what the guy looked like, just what his older son looked like. As I was telling her, she saw the older son in the parking lot leaving, so we assumed they were gone for good at that point, and we sort of went back to normal working. I was still on edge because I was super uncomfortable, but I just talked to my coworkers to pass the time. At around 6 or so, my supervisor asked me to take some cardboard down to the dumpster. I went down alone, so there weren't many people nearby. The dumpster is sort of close to some rides, so you could see what was going on from other points at the park. As I'm throwing away cardboard, I notice a figure walking down towards the dumpsters, and I see that it's the same guy from earlier. He had come back to the park again. I started to freak out because I didn't have a walkie-talkie on me, and there wasn't anyone nearby to do anything. He kept walking closer and closer, eyeballing me every so often as I internally start panicking and getting increasingly nervous. I thought in that moment that I was going to be kidnapped, and I didn't even know what to do. Thankfully, my supervisor saw him from a distance and started speed walking in my direction. She walked right past him before he could get to me, and he did a double take and just stood there as if he wasn't walking toward me. She walked me back up and told me that she didn't know if that was the guy but didn't want to leave me there alone. She switched me to another ride and said she'd make sure he didn't follow me around. She had told some other co-workers about what happened, and a co-worker from before made sure to stay near me because the guy kept lingering at some areas, looking at me and trying to be near me when he thought my guard was down. Every time my co-workers thought he was getting too close, they'd stand near me to make sure he left me alone. At some point, his youngest kid came to the ride I was operating, and he stayed on until closing time came about, so the guy was nearby for a lot of the time. Toward closing, I was offered a ride home from a co-worker because he didn't want me to be alone, walking to the parking lot. As we go outside, we sit on the stairs with some other co-workers, and we notice this car that was still in the parking lot, even though at that point, we had been closed for about 45 minutes. The guy was still there, with his family and everything, just lingering. There were no other cars in the customer parking except for them, so I assumed this dude had to have some of his own family involved, because he was just waiting there. I can't see any other reason he'd be there. It felt too coincidental that his family so happened to stay later than they had to. I kept nervously looking over and looking to see what he was doing, and he was just staring in our direction as he just sat while his family was doing some other stuff. Thankfully, at some point they had left, but I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable at the thought of if I was just completely alone when I left. I'm so glad I have some responsible and caring co-workers, because if not, I have no idea what would have happened.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.